Hi, this is Compass, finding spirituality in the everyday. My name is Ryan Dunn. This is an episode about transformation. We're going to hear Ben Gosden's story about addiction, recovery, and grace. What's interesting is that as we hear Ben share his story, we're invited to take note of the ways in which our own lives have fallen out of alignment with our values. We also will learn about how the principles of recovery impact our faith and our daily habits. Ben Gosden is a pastor and author of Grace Rediscovered, a book that narrates his personal journey towards recovery and spiritual alignment. With over 15 years of pastoral experience, Ben shares insights on overcoming addiction, the power of prayer in recovery, and the importance of humility and acceptance in our faith journeys. If stories like this are meaningful for you, we invite you to share your appreciation by clicking the subscribe button on your podcast listening platform. You can also leave a rating and review on your podcast platform. That helps new people discover the meaningful stories that we share through Compass. All right, let's get into an inspiring discussion that highlights the presence of grace in our everyday lives with Ben Gosden here on Compass. Ben, it sounds like we watched a lot of the same shows growing up. I noticed that you also have a fondness for professional wrestling. Is that true? Does that still last for today, or did you outgrow that?
You know, it's funny. I am probably one of those like get off my lawn guys. I don't follow it enough now.
Yeah.
But one of the beautiful things, and you're probably aware of this, is it seems like all the pro wrestlers from when we were kids, obviously they're too old to wrestle, they've all got podcasts now.
They do.
And it is like reliving my childhood. Man, Bruce Pritchard's podcast, he's been with the WWE guys forever. I love Bruce Pritchard and just all the inside stories about all the stuff that we grew up watching. So I'm probably more nostalgic about pro wrestling.
Yeah.
But I do appreciate it. I really do.
Yeah, same boat. I got into that stuff in the biographies on A&E. Yeah. Did you see those? I found myself watching those kind of thinking like, you know what? I think I like professional wrestling. Don't tell anybody.
Well, and I'll tell you what's fun. Did you follow it as a kid?
I did.
Okay. So do you subscribe to Peacock?
Yes.
So you know they got all the archives of all the stuff. I mean, you can go back and watch the pay-per-view. Man, it is so much fun. It's so much fun.
Amazing. Our listeners are like, what are these guys talking about?
Oh, man.
We're looking at our past, but we're talking about the presence of grace throughout our lives. And one of the ways that you kind of address your past, Ben, is looking at some of the things that you grabbed onto growing up and what was sometimes a chaotic childhood. And you noted that oftentimes, you looked for father figures in professional wrestlers, and sometimes you looked for family connections through like the TGIF shows that came on ABC on Friday nights. Did you have a particular favorite show or TV family, or one that you'd like to find yourself in the midst of right now?
You know, it's funny. I remember when I was a kid, I loved Family Matters.
Mm-hmm.
There was something about the Winslow family that was a lot of fun. But, of course, I loved Full House. Step by Step was fun, all the TGIF. I remember TGIF being a wonderful thing because my parents, this was also the day and age when you probably had only one TV in the house. My parents had shows that they liked, and it was like, don't talk while our shows are on. TGIF was designed, I know, for families, but it was really something that felt inclusive of kids. And it's funny, looking back, there's a lot of things that are formative about those sitcoms that we don't realize, and it comes out in deep ways and sort of the unfulfilled expectations of our childhoods.
Right. It's like almost each one had some kind of lesson that they were trying to teach throughout it, right?
Yeah, and you think that life can be solved, the hard moments, with like a sit-down conversation at the end of an episode and piano music playing in the background and everything's fine, and you realize it's not. You age and you're like, life's a lot more messy than a sitcom, but for what they were, they're wonderful escapes. Yeah.
Well, your book is Grace Rediscovered, and it's about a journey in recovery. I think a lot of us tend to, when it comes to the The heavy things or things like addiction, we gloss over it. And certainly that's part of your story in terms of kind of being in denial. Was there like a moment of realization for you, a kind of aha moment when you realized that maybe you did have an addiction?
I was told growing up that addiction was in my family. And so I knew, and my father was an alcoholic that my mother forbid from drinking. Okay. And as a friend in recovery has told me, God, there's nothing more miserable than an alcoholic who's not allowed to drink. I mean, it's just the worst. And so I knew that genetically it was there, but, it's almost hard to describe. So that was one element. Then another element was I was never comfortable in my own skin growing up. I always wanted to fit in. I was so afraid of rejection. And I remember the very first night in college when I had alcohol, and the warmth that washed over me, and all of a sudden the ease that I felt, it was magic. I mean, it was just like, this is what I've been looking for. I ebbed and flowed, and then of course, as I came into a career and had more money and able to buy more alcohol, and it just a nightly unwinding routine slowly became something that I didn't even realize it was out of control until it was out of control. And it was really during the COVID pandemic that I began to really, as I told somebody recently, I began to, like the morning after, and I felt like I'd been hit by a car, and it was awful. But, it was the pandemic, and, we were all kind of just, taking things very casual because we couldn't go anywhere.
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
And I found myself the next morning feeling both physically terrible and then this deep sense of shame. And I knew that I would tell myself, like, oh, that was too much last night. I'm not going to do that again. And then unconsciously, I would that same night be doing it all over again. And I began to Google how many drinks makes you an alcoholic. And looking back, I realized if you have to Google whether or not you probably are an alcoholic. So I was rationalizing my intake, and that's when I really began to say something's probably not right. And it was a combination of the pandemic. I was getting my doctor of ministry. I was a functioning pastor doing what pastors were doing of just trying to do all the virtual, and I was increasingly exhausted and not like just tired, like my soul was weary. So there was something that was coalescing in there, but it really began with that, one of these dry January things, that's in vogue. And I just began to feel a shift all around that I thought there's something going on here. There's a longer story that it took me about 3 months, and I realized there's something deeper here than just I need to break a habit.
Yeah. But all along you were still functional, right? It's not like you were losing jobs over this or anything like that.
I was functional on the outside. I was increasingly miserable on the inside. Perfectionism is a paralyzing thing in me. I want to be all the things to all the people all the time. And it works until it doesn't. And alcohol became the thing that I escaped with, the thing that I self-medicated. It said, this tension would rise every day, and it was the thing that would take the edge off. Yes, on the one hand, but I also think I probably was going to be one of those alcoholics that it may not have been the loss of a job, but it may have been a diagnosis. It may have been a doctor saying, hey, there's something wrong.
Okay.
And it's from years. Because I was over 10 years of secretly, daily, heavy drinking.
What were your first steps towards recovery?
My first steps were what we call white knuckling, which is like you just grit and bear every night, because my body and everything was like clockwork. At 8:30 at night, I would sit down with a cocktail, and I would try to avoid it, and I would walk the dog, and I would all these, and I would be increasingly anxious. I became an early bird, which I am to this day, because I just decided I'm going to go to bed. If I go to sleep, then I don't have to worry with it. So I started going to bed about 9 o'clock, and now wake up around 4 a.m. and realize I love being a morning person. But all that was to avoid it. It was about 3 months in that I had an opportunity with a group that I could have a drink, and I began to do what we call in recovery play the tape, where I just kind of played, I could have one. And then I played it out where I knew what would happen. That's when I called a friend who I know is in recovery. And I said, I think I've got a problem. Normal people don't think about alcohol the way that I think about it. And Ryan, it even got into, it's weird to say for people who are not alcoholics, the emotional and mental energy I would spend every day taking stock. How much is in the house? Do I need to go to the liquor store? When I traveled, where's the nearest liquor store? How can I go? All these things that normal people just don't spend that kind of time thinking about, I quietly obsessed over.
Was that the first point at which you reached out to somebody else about this? Were you just carrying it all yourself up to that point?
Yeah, it was. Even hiding my worries from my wife, because I was never a mean drunk. I was actually a fun one. It would loosen me up. I'd get funnier. I was beginning to have memory lapses, which is one of the first signs of what doctors call like wet brain. We would have entire conversations that I wouldn't remember the next morning. And so I knew something was going on. But yeah, reaching out to a friend who's actually a church member. And I'm blessed, by the way, that I have numerous church members who are very publicly in recovery. We have recovery ministries that happen out of here. And so I've been a supporter of the recovery world for years. I had no idea until then that I needed to be a member of it.
Were you able to look at some of the process of recovery and really point out how it opens us up to a deeper relationship to God? Why are the principles of recovery so important in our faith walk? Like, I think about this even for the person who's listening, who's maybe saying, well, I don't identify an addiction that I need recovery from. Why would I be that interested in the principles of recovery?
Yeah. The story I tell in the book is one of my favorite ones. A friend told that a guy who'd been in recovery for a long time said to him at a meeting once, he said, "You know the difference between God and you?" And he goes, "No, what?" And he goes, "God doesn't go around pretending to be you."
Dang.
And the truth is, now, 3 years later, I can see my addiction and my disease as a gift because it opened me up to the reality that God is God and I am not. And more than I care to even describe, I try to play God in my life, whether it's obsessing about the future, trying to control other people's lives, worrying about things that are beyond my control, all these things that whether you have a disease, the disease of addiction or not, we all try to play God in some form or fashion, or we self-medicate, when we can't be God and we're all anxious about it. Well, what do? We go eat. We scroll, we doom scroll on social media. We work, we become workaholics. We try to fill a God-sized hole in our soul somehow or another. For me, alcohol worked until it couldn't work anymore. But alcohol was the outward expression of an inward dis-ease, that I was also a workaholic, that I was also, my ego was bigger than it should have been. I needed right sizing. I was a control freak. I had to let go of some things to just accept I can't control everything.
Yeah. Well, tell me about that a little bit, because with drinking, you can quit drinking, but you can't stop working, Ben. So how does it work to be a workaholic in recovery while still working?
Yeah. You, just like with alcohol, and where every day I pray for numerous things. By the way, let me begin by saying I'm a pastor and have been one for almost 15 years and a Christian most of my life. I've never prayed the way that I've prayed in recovery. It opened my spiritual life in a way that I've experienced God's salvation in daily, mysterious, just wonderful ways.
How did your prayers change?
From prayers of petition, God, give me this, give me that, help this, help that, to prayers like, God, help me accept life as it comes today. Help me remember the things that I cannot control, and help me to put my whole, you can steal baptismal language, by the way. Help me to put my whole trust in your grace. We say that in our baptismal liturgy. The first 3 steps of the 12 steps say that essentially you can boil them down to can't, God can, I think I'll let God. That's steps 1, 2, and 3. And if that becomes your prayer every day, to just rest in the mystery that I can't do this alone, God, but you can come alongside me. And I think I'm going to let go of some stuff and let you do that. The burden that sometimes quickly, sometimes slowly, but in God's timing begins to just unload from you. And by the way, how can you get over the workaholism too? You reorder your life. You also realize that a lot of the, quote, effort I'm putting in is a way that I'm trying to do things that are beyond my control. I'm trying to be the greatest at whatever it is. I'm trying for my DS to think I'm the best pastor in the district. I want the bishop to notice me. I want all these things. And then you just say, you know what? Those things don't matter, but what does matter? I do a good job. I'm faithful to my work. I think about others, that kind of thing. And all of a sudden it scales the burden of work that we think we carry. It scales it into a much more manageable, right-sized way that it's not the only thing in your life that should give you meaning.
There's a difference between asking God to do something and letting God have control.
Yes.
I find myself, even when I think I'm giving control over to God, like really I'm just asking God to kind of conform to my whims. Like, Here's what I want to have happen, God. I trust you to do it. And that doesn't always work. Can you give an example of like what it looks like in your own life to just lay into God, letting God have that control instead of just asking God to do it?
It's so funny because what you just described as a lifelong church person, we literally pray that every Sunday as part of the Lord's Prayer, thy will be done.
Mm-hmm.
And what I learned was these old timers in recovery rooms who would say the serenity prayer, God grant me the serenity to accept the things I cannot change, the courage to change the things I can, and the wisdom to know the difference. And then I would hear some guys say, thy will, not my will, be done. Mm. That's a simple reminder that serenity comes when we learn to accept that the things we just simply can't change, that we ask God for the courage to be faithful to the things we can change, and that we seek God's wisdom to know the difference between the two. Now, how does that work in your daily life? It's funny how many issues can magically solve themselves when I let go of them and stop trying to wrench them into my timing or my way. I don't deal well with unresolved tension. And so one of the things that I've really had to work into, and now it comes a lot more natural out of habit, is can I go to bed at night and not stew over something that's not done or something that's not, solved yet, and just say, you know what, we'll pick it back up tomorrow. We'll pick it back up tomorrow. Part of that, too, is the perspective change that I've learned in recovery that I think people beyond recovery rooms need to know, which is we only have today. I live my life too often dwelling on a past that I cannot change or a future that I cannot control. But if I live for today and say, God, give me perspective just for today, God will take care of those other things in God's timing. And then tomorrow, we'll get into today. We're not guaranteed anything other than today. It's a freedom that's almost indescribable, but it really comes from trying to get out of God's way. And I don't know that I ever realized how much I was just trying to be God.
Yeah, even from the aspect of being a pastor for all those years, right?
Oh, yeah. All the church problems, the budget issues, the oh, no, our top giver passed away. Oh, no, this mission trip's not going to come together. All these things that you just, and sometimes you just have to, and I'll have people come to me now and worry, and I have to remind myself to just tell them, it's okay. We'll get it. When? I don't know. They'll come together. That's really hard.
Yes, it is. Yes, it is. And I wish that I could just understand from reading your book how all that plays out in my own life, but it feels like there's more of a process to it than that.
Well, and that's the beauty of the steps. So you begin with, acknowledging that we try to be God, to acknowledge God's role in our life. The third step prayer is to give our life and our will over to the love and care of God. So step 3 is that we make a decision to give our life and our will over to the love and care of God. That's not something, as Christians, you don't give your life to God once. We give our life to God every day. This is what Bonhoeffer talks about, that Christ bids a person to come and die. And I think it was Mother Teresa who said that every day we pray that we die to self so that we can be raised again in Christ. So that's the third step prayer. All these things that we talk about in our discipleship language, for me, became very real through those steps. 4 is a personal inventory. How do we go through the ways in which we just obsess and sin and all these different things that we try to be God, and then we try to reconcile those things, right?
Yeah. You talked about this daily giving over of ourselves. Do you have a reminder or a daily practice that helps you kind of repeat that process?
Yeah. So I'm an early morning person, and I go to the gym every morning. And so part of my car ride, I spend time just praying. I kind of have the same formula, but it sort of ebbs and flows. I'm grateful to be sober. Every morning I wake up now sober. It's funny, the magic is still there, because I can't tell you how many mornings I woke up just like a car had hit me, hurting. But I can wake up and I'm at peace with myself. I'm clear-headed. I feel rested. So I'm grateful for sobriety. I'm grateful for a new day. And then we get into, God, give me acceptance, to accept life as it comes. Somebody told me once, this is a great analogy, that we should hold life like a loose garment, something that we don't hold and cling to so tight, but that we kind of let it ebb and flow. And that ebbing and flowing is a trust that God's gonna guide us. Now, we have our part, but it's more a response to God versus us trying to tell God to come with us. But yeah, I pray every morning in the car. I have about a 15-minute drive to the gym, and just every morning try to pray over it.
There's a line in your book, my reading app was telling me that it's one of the most highlighted, and it says, life alignment is about arranging our lives so that the things we invest time in genuinely reflect values we hold most dear. Why do you think that's been resonating so deeply? Why do people keep coming back to that one?
You sent that to me, and I was thrilled to hear that, and that's not a line that I would have expected.
Right. Doesn't that always happen, though?
Yeah,
like every sermon you've ever given, you're like,
yeah.
Here's the take home, and they're like, yeah, I really heard this in your sermon, Pastor.
Yeah. I think that came from sort of, there's 2 ways to know what we value in life. One is to look at our checkbook, and one is to look at our calendar. And someone told me that once, and I've used it numerous times in sermons, that if you did an audit of the way you spend your money, and you did an audit of the way you spend your time, you'll know what you value in life. And then I come to Jesus saying that where your treasure is, there your heart is also. I think in the 21st century world, he'd say, where your Google Calendar is, there your heart is also. So yeah, if you want to live a certain way and by certain values, we have to align our life so that our time reflects those things. Otherwise, it's idle words. So for me, if I say that I value, let's say that I value being rested, and then I stay up late doom scrolling on my phone. Well, what have I just done? I've gone against my values. Or I want to be an early morning person, and then I get drink at night, and stay up too late and all this. Like, I'm going against my values, sometimes without even realizing it. So it's just saying, if this is what I value, then let's align our lives to follow that.
You talk about this thing you referred to as margin time within the book, something that you value. First, can you explain to us what margin time is?
Yeah, for me, margin time is how much time do you have that you don't have something scheduled. I read an article a few years ago, I think it was a Harvard Business Review article, that said one of the top practices they found of CEOs of companies and stuff is what they called like undesignated time. And one guy described that he'd spend 30 minutes a day just looking out his window. And they'd go, looking out your window doing what? And he'd say, nothing, just looking out my window. And so what I try to do with my time, because again, one of my values is, and it's not that I value margin time, it's that margin gets me to the value that says I don't need to be so busy that I have every minute of my day dictated to me. So I try to put a little bit, even if it's 10 or 15 minutes between Zoom calls or between meetings. I guard my time. Short of an emergency, I don't give certain hours of the day away. My church people know you may get an email from me very early in the morning, and that's because I'm a morning person, but I don't take meetings before 9:30. And the reason I do that is I value my physical health, and want to take care of that. And that's when I spend time with my kids, getting them ready for school. And that's a value to me, that being a parent. And so I'm not going to give that time away because, there's this thing that seemingly seems like a big deal, and let that tell me how to dictate my time. Short of an emergency, like a life being threatened, here's the hours I'm available. And then boundary is one of the most blessed words, I think, in the Christian life. How do we set good boundaries?
So I read about margin time, and we're going to reveal a little bit of my neuroses here, because at the start of every day, I map out the entire day. I mean, hour by hour. And so within that, I've put in like this as part of my checklist of times on the day. I put in margin time, and it arrives, and I'm like, I'm not sure I'm doing this right, because it feels like it has become another thing within my day.
Do you have every hour out?
Within my work day, I do. But, well, not applied to. I mean, I'll build in, a margin time or a break time or whatever that looks like. But how do you keep it from, I don't know, not feeling a pressure of something else that you have to do?
Yeah. The reason I ask that is because the one thing I would, if I were coaching you, I would say that's a great practice to be organized, but you're planning way too much because you're controlling too much of your day.
Okay.
And what would it look like if you gave up some of that control? Could your soul take that? Part of what we're doing,
well, I have a feeling that the right answer is yes, right, Ben? But there's a part of me that's like,
the right answer is the honest answer, and the authentic answer. And one of the great gifts that I have worked into in recovery and therapy is to stop placing value judgments on everything in my life. You said the right answer, and that's what I would say too. Why does it have to be right or wrong? It just is. But I would guess you're a perfectionist, and you're very productive, and you get a lot of meaning and purpose out of the fact that you're able to produce and to do. There's nothing wrong with that. What's healthy, though, is to say, at what point am I doing this for reasons other than the work itself, which is to feed some kind of inner need? At what point am I doing this at the expense of something more important? Like, am I taking this meeting here when it'd be fine to just blow the meeting off and go spend an hour with my kids, or something for myself? Or even, we're playing a coaching game here, or even like, do you map in time for you? Because one of the things that I was so bad and have been so bad about is that my God time is usually time that I'm giving away. Reading the Bible for sermon preparation. Preparing a Bible. Sometimes I just need to read the Bible for my own soul. I need to be as selfish as I can possibly be. Because if I'm not taking care of myself proactively, guess what happens, at least for me? I become selfish in other ways because I don't even realize how resentful I'm getting for how much I'm giving away to everybody else. And then for me, that's why I'm going to sit down and have a couple drinks tonight. Because I deserve it. Maybe let go of some of that.
All right. No schedule will be written tomorrow.
You can make a schedule, but make it looser. I walk my dog. And so what I do is I get out and walk for 15 minutes. And just those few minutes, podcast or your friends, something you enjoy, get one of those wrestling podcasts we talked about or something. Take about 15 minutes of it, or an audiobook. I don't know, just something to breathe in the glory of God.
Well, you wrote this book because you had experienced a sense of transformation leading into it. Was there a part of the writing process that brought some things up for you, or brought some, in a sense, connection or enlightenment?
Oh, yeah. It was a very cathartic experience. I was sad when I finished the manuscript. I felt like I was sending my child off to kindergarten, and by sending it to the publisher, because every morning I was kind of alternating some writing time with gym time, and a lot of mornings at 5 o'clock instead of the gym, I was writing and thinking and reflecting and writing chapters that made me cry. May not make anyone else cry, but it made me. James Howell told me recently, and I love this line, he said that he found that writing was really for him, and if you wanted to look over his shoulder and get something out of it, great. And that was a lot of my experience, that this book really was for me, to just unload this cathartic experience. And if a reader can pick it up and get something, what a gift. I love that. Yeah, I mean, I thought a lot about a difficult childhood. I thought a lot about the man that I want to be. I wrote a whole chapter on fatherhood and manhood, because I think this notion of hypermasculinity is one of the worst things that is victimizing and taking advantage of young men in our country, because boys are being told that things like feelings are enemies, and they're not. They're God's gift. And so what you have are overgrown little boys who are coming into adulthood and running the world, who think that being a man is about exerting strength, when they forget that the strongest thing we can do is be vulnerable and self-giving and compassionate. So all of that was just so important for me.
Well, for folks who maybe want to hear more of what you're doing, is there a convenient spot online for them to look you up?
Yeah, so my publicist told me that I've not done a good job, that Ben Gosden Coaching .com is out there, and that is where I've started doing a little bit of consulting and coaching work, whether it's one-on-one coaching, which I love. I mean, I use kind of a 12-step approach with people for whatever it is that they want to make a life change about. But I've done a little bit of business coaching. I love working with churches. So any way that we can come along and journey alongside some transformation is great. So there, and then social media is at B Gosden, Gosden, on Facebook or Instagram.
Ben, thank you so much for spending this time with us and for sharing your story with us.
Thank you, Ryan. Appreciate you always.
Well, that brings us to the end of this episode. A big thank you again to Ben Gosden for sharing his story with us. If you found today's conversation as inspiring as I did, then I invite you to visit our website at umc.org/compass. There you'll find detailed episode notes and more episodes to explore on your journey to finding spirituality in the everyday. We'd like to extend our gratitude to the incredible team at United Methodist Communications for making this podcast possible. Their dedication and hard work behind the scenes allow us to bring you meaningful stories and insights every other Wednesday, which is when new episodes of Compass come out. If you haven't already done so, please consider again subscribing to Compass Finding Spirituality in the Everyday. Your subscriptions, ratings, and reviews mean the world to us, and they help others find the podcast and join our growing community. If you want more Compass right now, well, check out episode number 145, Contentment and Connecting with All Life. Another super cool episode of Transformation is number 139, From Hate to Hope. That's with my friend Neely Hicks. Thank you again for tuning in and being a part of our Compass journey. Until next time, stay curious and open to grace and spirituality that surrounds us in our everyday lives. Peace.